All right. Testing 1, 2, 3. It's working now. Welcome to the Sunday Law Update, updating you on where we are in the book of Daniel and Revelation. Sister Bob, I got some news for you. It's over. It's over. We're going to prove it to you again. And I tell you, it's going to be the bomb. But what we're going to do is we're going to have our Country Living segment with my dear sister and her wonderful husband. And they have a scientific experiment just for you. Amen.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back again to Country Living. I heard that there have been some complaints that I do not introduce myself. I'm Dr. Sonia Carroll. I'm a naturopath, right? And my contact, some people are asking for, is 917-733-9087. I'll repeat this at the end of the presentation. Now, remember, we started in December. And we said from December that beginning 2025, we are going to reset. We are having a reset. We're hearing about a lot of resetting the economy, resetting government, resetting everything. We are focusing on a reset in our health in 2025. Pastor this morning talked about a reset in what? Our finances, get out of debt. That's one of the tenets. That's one of the pillars of country living, of final day preparation, getting out of debt. So we are focusing on resetting our health, getting that body temple in optimum function for the glory of God so that the Spirit can dwell in us and do its work in us. And we laid the foundation. I'm going to do a quick summary again so that you can follow me for those that were not there. We went through the periodic table, and we went through the 16 essential elements that you must be aware of, that your body needs for optimum functioning and for health, maintenance, and restoration. And those 16 elements are, and that's in order of importance and the volume of it in your body. Oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, calcium, nitrogen, phosphorus, chlorine, fluorine, sulfur, potassium, sodium, magnesium, silicone, iron, iodine, and manganese. And we said out of those 16 essentials, fundamentals, there are 4 most important ones. These are a must in your regular diet so your body can function and maintain health. And these are calcium, iodine, sodium, and silicone. Of course, calcium, because that's your structure, that's your bones, that's your skeleton. Iodine, that's metabolism, so you can process and use the nutrients to maintain your health. Sodium is what keeps everything in solution, so it can be absorbed. And silicone, your largest organ, your skin, that's your protection. Now, we started off with calcium, and the last time I was here last month, we went through calcium and the importance of calcium. Why? Because calcium is one of the most important of those 16 elements, and it's the number 1 in the 4 most important ones. Because when calcium is off or deficient in the body, all the other elements are off. And health starts what? Degenerating. Because calcium regulates all of the other elements in the body, and that's the importance of calcium. And we went through some of the foods. We said kale was the highest in the plant kingdom with calcium, and the importance of eating greens every day so you can maintain a good level of calcium in your system. We went through a number of other foods that are high in calcium: almonds, avocados, the seeds, broccoli, cabbage, lentils, prunes, etc. Now, today we are going to carbon. We're going to look at carbon today as the second element and an important element in our system that we must be aware of in our diet when we are preparing our meals and when we are shopping and when we are trying to restore health and maintain health. So carbon, and carbon is called the builder. And why is carbon called the builder? Because carbon is what they call the birth element. Carbon is responsible for conception or the beginning of life. But it must need tranquility and harmony and warmth for the life principle to spark, for there to be fertilization. And sometimes some women complain they cannot get pregnant. and they try and they cannot get pregnant. Why? Because they're so anxious and stressed and they're trying so hard. Because carbon is the life giver. That's what sparks the fertilization. That's where life begins in the cells, through carbon. And carbon is very important. But it needs a tranquil environment, and it needs warmth. So if you're low in heat, body heat and generating, then it's just like a hen sitting on her eggs. It must maintain a certain temperature for those eggs to hatch. It's the same thing with the human body. You have to have a certain level of heat in your body, and carbon is what creates that heat. Carbon combines with oxygen to create heat in the body. So you have cold hands and you have cold feet, then you know you're what? Deficient in carbon. You're not producing enough body heat. So carbon, the more carbon is consumed, there is a more demand for oxygen in the body. And I'll explain that to you. Because all carbohydrates have carbon in it, all carbohydrates. And we know there are many sources of carbohydrates in that we consume. There are sugars that we get from fruits, that's called what? Fructose. And there's sugar in milk that we call lactose. There is sugar in the starches, glucose, and cane sugar, saccharose. So there are many forms of sugar, many forms of carbohydrates, but all of them have carbon in them. And carbon is very important. Now, when you consume too much carbon, that's where the problem comes about. Because the processing or metabolism of carbon, the byproduct or the waste product from that is carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is heavier than air. It replaces oxygen in the body. So when you have a consumption of high carbohydrates, and you have an excess of carbon in the body, and when that is processed, you have high levels of carbon dioxide in your body, and that stifles what? Oxygen in the body. So you then become low in oxygen. And that is a problem. When you're low in oxygen, then what? Life dies. You need oxygen. The cells begin to what? Decompose. They begin to die. And that is why we have to be so careful about our carbohydrate intake, the amount of carbon, because excess carbon can be very dangerous. And, especially those that are diabetic, and that's where the problem comes sometimes. It's not that they cannot consume sugars. They can consume sugars, but it is in excess. So carbon is what we call the builder. It is called the cell birth. That's where life begins. You need carbon for new cells, for new birth to take place. But it has to be in a tranquil environment. It has to be in a warm environment. So heat has to be generated. And when it mixes with oxygen, then we have what? Birth taking place, regeneration taking place. But if you're consuming too many carbs, then you're stifling that oxygen, then what? Birth cannot take place, regeneration cannot take place. Now, let's look at some of the characteristics of people that consume too much carbohydrates. And some of it is obvious. They're obese or overweight. They're flabby. They're slow. They're sluggish. They daze sometimes. They sleep a lot. They get up late. Most times they're unhappy people. Most times they're bitter. Most times sometimes they're recluse. They do not like to socialize. And they're very sensitive to criticism because they think people are always what? Criticizing them or commenting on their looks or looking at them, thinking that they're fat, because in their minds they know, what it is, and they think they're very defensive. They're on the defensive about that. They're very clumsy, and they're more prone to diabetes, as we said before. Some of those people are nervous people. They're quickly agitated, again, because they're defensive, and they're low in oxygen because of the high intake of carbohydrates and because of the processing of those excess carbohydrates. The byproduct, the waste product, is carbon dioxide, which stifles oxygen, so they're low in oxygen. And when you're low in oxygen, what? Your extremities do not get that oxygen, and the extremities need the oxygen for the carbon to turn heat, so therefore cold hands and cold feet, so they're always really uncomfortable. Another thing that they're prone to is dizziness, edema, which is swelling and retention of water, enlarged livers, and they usually have high levels of liver fat, And that liver fat is so dangerous too, because your liver is the number one detoxifying organ in the body. Your liver too is where new cells also are being made. So when you have that high level of liver fat, your body is not detoxifying efficiently, and also regeneration is not taking place. So you're really creating an environment for degeneration and for disease to set in. These people are always short of breath. And the very thing that they need most is the very thing that they resist, which is exercise and walking and exertion to burn up that excess carbohydrates or that excess fuel that they're hoarding and storing in their bodies. So when carbon dioxide is in the blood, you find that it excludes oxygen. It takes the place of oxygen. And that's the experiment that Mr. Carroll and his team, the kids, will do with us afterward. They would show you that when there is carbon dioxide, there is no oxygen. So that quick experiment will demonstrate that so you can see it for yourself, so you can get a visual, practical understanding of that overconsumption of carbs, in the form of white flour products, in the form of pastas, in the form of sweets and cookies and candies, etc. Now, as I said, carbohydrates are important. We need to generate heat. That's the number one fuel for the body, carbon, but at the same time in excess. And when it is refined and processed, then it is gives an infusion of that sugar to the body, which is dangerous. Now, when you eat the carbohydrates in its whole form, whole grains, as they come from nature, it has a fiber in it. And that fiber in the whole grains or in the carbohydrates in its whole form is a defense mechanism. It's what we call slow release. So the fiber prevents a quick infusion of the sugar into your bloodstream. So it releases it slowly. That is why there's fiber in oranges, and there's fiber in the apples, and there's fiber in the vegetation, so that the carbs, the carbon, the sugars in there would be slowly released into the body, into the bloodstream, so we don't get that quick infusion. The spiking up and down, exactly. Now, when the fiber is taken out, when foods are processed and refined, then you just get that infusion, and that's where the danger comes, that there's too much sugar at one time for your body to process, not enough insulin produced by the pancreas to handle that volume at that one time, and that's where, over time, you develop diabetes and other complications, from that. Again, for those that are consuming excess in carbs, you find that these excess sugars or carbs in the body, it causes fermentation and inflammation and acidity, and that is a conducive environment for bacterial growth. So most times these people have bowel issues because they have an imbalance in the bacteria in the gut. So you have an overgrowth of the bad bacteria, and therefore they're more prone to diarrheas and they're more prone to constipation because the bowels are not moving. Peristalsis is inhibited. They're not moving as they should because of that decomposition taking place because of the high level of acidity and fermentation, which is caused by the excess intake of carbohydrates or sugars in their bloodstream. Now, when people are taking in carbohydrates, there's certain elements that you have to have with it to balance it off, because then it throws everything off. And these include potassium, iron, calcium, and silicone and sodium foods. So when people are obese, or when people are dealing with excess of carbohydrates and stored carbohydrates or sugar in the body, they should be aware of that. They should be in an environment where they have an incline, where they'll be walking, so that it forces them to breathe in deep so that they get more oxygen into the lungs. Because remember, that excess of carbohydrates is what? Inhibiting oxygenation, of the blood. So they need that walking, they need that exercise, they need that incline. They need also to be in an environment out in nature, in the country, with a lot of trees, which is providing a lot of oxygen. That's what they need, because remember, the oxygen level is low, and they need to burn up or use up that excess stored sugar in their system that's causing the fermentation and decomposition and rot and bacterial growth, etc., diabetes, and all of those are the ailments that come with it. So, and they must remember that to balance off that excess carbohydrates, which translates into excess carbon, they must have foods that are high in iron, in potassium, because iron is the element we said that takes oxygen around the body. So if you're low in oxygen, that means to say you need iron to take that oxygen around the body. So they have to have foods high in iron. They have to have foods high in potassium. They have to have foods high in calcium and silicone. We went through some of the personality problems that these people would have. Most times they're bitter. You know, they're resentful because they're unhappy. They're unhappy with themselves, you know, because, of course, this excess weight that they're carrying and all of the issues that come with it, you know, with bowel movements and everything and the foggy mind and everything. So they're very kind of hypersensitive, you know, and sometimes fault-finding. And because why? Because they're almost jealous, as it were, of people that take care of themselves and slimmer and in better health, you know. And sometimes it is not because of resentment per se, but it is their desire to be like that. But they're fighting. They're fighting because they cannot get that because of some maybe childhood trauma or something that causing them to overeat or overconsume on those sweets. And it's a struggle for them, so they cannot get over it. And every time they succumb and they fall to it, then they're angry with themselves. And that translates itself in the interaction with other people. So they come across as angry and bitter and fault-finding, etc. You know, so these are some of the ways in which that carbon excess, carbohydrate excess, carbon excess in the body can also affect your personality, can also affect your relationships, and can also affect your spirituality. Because then if you're always bitter and you're down and you're depressed and you're sluggish, then what? You're not appreciating what? Godly things and heaven things and God's blessings and the studying of the word, because you cannot even focus because your mind is so slow and so sluggish. You know, let's look at some of the foods now that we can get carbon in, you know, and again, it is carbohydrates. So this would be obvious. But one of the best foods, especially for diabetics, most times we hear that diabetics cannot consume carbs. They can consume carbs, but as I said, it has to be whole carbs. Carbs in its natural form that has the fiber for slow release so that there isn't this quick infusion of sugar into the bloodstream. And one of the best for that is oats. Oats, yes, it's high in fiber, and it gives you that slow release that they need, but yet still it has enough carbohydrates, you know, to give them the fuel that they need. Almonds, apricots, apples, barley, beans, you know, whole wheat products, whole wheat breads and so, yellow cornmeal, dates, figs, grapes, lentils, molasses. All of these are wholesome carbohydrates that are high also in carbon. But raisins and prunes and rice, brown rice and rye and raspberries, you know, peas and beans, all of those are good sources of carbohydrates. But as I said before, everything in what? Moderation. Everything in moderation. Because anything in excess has consequences, and it has adverse consequences, things that have an adverse effect on your health that's destructive to you, and you have to be mindful of it. Everything in moderation. Carbs are good. Carbon is important in our body because it is the what? The birth. That's where cell birth begins. That's where fertilization, that's the longevity of the race. You know, it is important. But excess of it, by excess of carbohydrates, then it comes with what? Adverse effects. So these are some of the things that have carbon in it and carbohydrates in it. So let us be aware of the amount of carbs that we eat. And carbs are good, but carbs in its whole natural form that has a carb fiber there for slow release. And everything is in moderation. So we did calcium and we did carbon today, you know, and we'll move on next time to another element as in terms of the importance in the body. So we can understand, you know, what's taking place in our body. We can understand what's affecting our emotions and our spirituality. And we can understand too how we should balance our diets so that we can maintain health, we can restore health, you know, and the body temple for the glory of God. So I'll give my last remaining minutes to Mr. Carroll and his team, and they will do a demonstration and demonstrate to you in a very practical way how excess carbohydrates intake produces excess carbon dioxide in the body, the waste product, and carbon dioxide replaces oxygen. So it gets rid of oxygen in the body, and low oxygen in the body is what? An environment for death and disease. and sluggishness and even paralysis and nervous issues.
Sure.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. Okay. Sister Marvella gave me a capable team. I told her I need some help as I do this experiment because I know my wife is talking about carbon dioxide. So I decided, look, we're going to make carbon dioxide. And I can share this with you. Our kids, and that's how it should be, go to some of the best schools around and they excel. You know, they're dismantling the Department of Education. But guess what? In our Adventist schools, we have nothing short of talented people. And so don't let anybody tell you that your kids are not capable. Okay. Now, this candle is burning, right? But what is it? What does it have that is causing it to keep burning like this?
Oxygen, correct.
Let's try that. Okay. You think it will continue burning all the time? It's already out. Why did it go out? Lack of oxygen.
All the oxygen was used up. After all the oxygen was used up, it went out. It went dead. Same thing happening in the body. When there's no oxygen, there's death.
And if you notice some of these complex principles, it could be made so simple that a little child can understand it. Because in our cells are always making, when you eat carbs, making carbon dioxide and water. So if I pour water on that match, what do you think is going to happen? Wouldn't it go out just the same? Huh? Okay. Okay, we have to get this right. Yeah. Okay, see if we can get this right. Okay. Okay.
The bottles are blocking.
Put this slide down. Like, just slide it down.
You have another match?
Okay, good, good. Okay. Okay, no, don't put it. Put it this. Okay. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're just going to just light a match and we're going to make the carbon dioxide.
Can you make the carbon dioxide still?
Okay, so what I'm going to do in the meantime, I'll make the carbon dioxide. You know, I guess when I went to the kitchen and they gave me this here, and they gave me an option of using a lighter, maybe I should have taken the lighter. Okay.
Cannot put it in the thing. You have to put
Okay.
it right there.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to make the carbon dioxide. We're going to put baking soda. Put this in front, please. Okay, good, good. And vinegar. Or young scientists. Pour more, more. Okay, if you notice, carbon dioxide put out that flame. Carbon dioxide put out that flame. And the pastor is going to put on the screen for us the periodic table so that we can see where carbon falls on the periodic table. As my wife was telling you, the importance of carbon. But let me mention this. Sweets. It's like poison. This is worse than crack cocaine. And you know why, right? Because when you eat the sweets, the end product is a lot of carbon dioxide and water. That's the end product. And both of them would, in fact, you know, carbon dioxide is what's in fire extinguishers. Carbon dioxide is in the fire extinguisher. So it puts out the fire and it replaces the oxygen. If you notice why that flame went out, is because it replaced the oxygen, you know, in your body, in your cells. And that's the formula for death.
Okay, so our second commitment in resetting our health is what? Be moderate in our consumption of carbohydrates. And when we do consume carbohydrates, it must be whole and in its natural form with the fiber as it came in nature for slow release. And try to resist and avoid the refined and processed carbohydrates, and ask the Lord for the strength to resist what? The sweets and those things that's causing decomposition and bacterial growth and acidity and inflammation in our systems. God bless.